Pollination and fertilization in flowering plants. In flowering plants, pollination precedes fertilization. Pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower of the same species. The pollen grains from the anthers are transferred to the stigma by pollinating agents such as wind and insects. Play the video clip below to see pollination in an insect-pollinated flower. When the bee lands on the flower, it facilitates the transfer of pollen grains from the stamens to the pistils. The pollen grain on the stigma absorbs nutrients and germinates to form a pollen tube. The pollen tube has a tube nucleus and a generative nucleus, which is also the male nucleus. The pollen tube grows down the style into the embryo sac with the tube nucleus leading. In the process, the generative nucleus divides into two male nuclei. The pollen tube enters the embryo sac through the micropyle, and when it reaches the center of the ovule, it penetrates the wall of the embryo sac and bursts open. The tube nucleus disintegrates, and the two male nuclei enter the embryo sac. One of the male nuclei fuses with egg cell to form the zygote, which develops into an embryo, while the other fuses with the two polar nuclei within the embryo sac to form the triploid nucleus, which is the primary endosperm nuclei. The zygote undergoes mitotic division and develops into an embryo, which then develops into a seed. The ovary wall changes into fruit wall.